Hello, it's Dr. Russ on a beautiful sunny Sunday morning in Portland. I hope you're well. I hope that you are somewhere that you can relax and just tune into my voice and tune into your body as we go mindful and we talk about grief. And if you don't know me, I'm Dr. Russ. I'm a chiropractor. I practice here in Portland. Been in practice for 26 years, worked with thousands of people. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just a person who has studied other people and has studied grief as something that has touched me and I think touches everyone in the course of their lives. And that's a big part of what I want to talk about today, because we think of grief as something that's bad. It's a negative emotion. It's something we want to get over. It's something that pulls us out of our life. We think of it, grief, as mourning and sadness. But what if we changed our thought about that? And what if we regard grief as a healing tool? What if we think of grief as a lifelong process of coming to terms with the fact that loss is a part of life? And what if grief was something that we were willing to flow with and through and actually find that it can enrich our life and enrich our experience, because loss, as painful as it can be, also can bring you to a deeper understanding of yourself. And in all of our emotional work that we're doing here, there's a few things we want to keep in mind. Number one is compassion and empathy for ourselves. Number two is our goal is not to fix ourselves. Our goal is to get to know ourselves and have the richest experience that we can have here in this lifetime, as rich as possible. And to always be open to joy and humor, being a part of our process, no matter how difficult it is. And so at this point, I would like to send special love and greetings to anyone watching and listening who is really stuck in a difficult circumstance, whose basic needs are not being met day to day. I see you. I care about you. I always welcome you to reach out to me. My contact link is in every video. And my hope is that things get better for you really soon. But in the meantime, here we are. You've got the sound of my voice and hopefully some quiet time and space, and you're comfortable. And let's just take a few deep breaths while we talk about loss. Scanning your body and ask yourself just this quick question: does my discussion of loss and grief trigger any particular part of your body or part of your mind into activity? Are you noticing a desire to protect yourself right now? Are you noticing a desire to check out and not listen, or maybe change the video because it's too much? I invite you to just notice that and inspect it a little more closely, see if there's any texture in there, see if there's anything underneath there, because your first reaction is often your conditioned reaction, and there's always going to be something underneath there. So we've got some time now, we've got some space. I promise you, I will not harm you. Let's just get through that protective layer. You may be noticing that you're drowsy. You may be noticing that you're starting to feel heavy in your limbs. That's great. You're relaxed. Feel free to drift off and fall asleep, because you'll still hear my voice and it'll get into your unconscious, and it'll still have a good effect. So what are some things that we lose? We lose our loved ones. I lost my mother when I was 10 years old. Hence, that grief has been a thread through my entire life. Um, Losing a job can cause a lot of grief because it brings fear and insecurity and instability with it. Biggie for folks in my practice that I work with is the loss of ability, loss of youth, loss of energy, loss of mobility. This is something that I deal with personally because we're all aging, but that's a lot of what comes into my office in terms of the emotional side. Is people are sad because they're sick, chronically sick, or chronically in pain, and they cannot do the things that they want to do, and they're afraid they're never going to be able to do those things again. So as I'm working with people and their bodies and touching and moving them and helping them remember to breathe and educating them about self-care, I'm also very aware that a lot of times this person is grieving who's coming into my office. And, my secret is I believe everyone is grieving all of the time. We may not be actively in one of these stages of grief that I'm going to talk about soon. But we've all lost and we're all healing, and there is no done. There's no time when you're done healing. There's no time when you're done grieving. So there's no timeline on it at all. There's no finish line. There's no end result. You're either having a true experience of yourself, or you're separate from yourself. And sometimes the true experience of yourself is angry or sad or depressed. So that's okay. And let's talk about these things. Here's the 5 stages of grief. This is a pretty common knowledge. You may read this in like a Psychology Today magazine, or if you Googled grief, you probably saw an article that listed these 5 stages. The first stage being shock and denial, the second stage being anger, the third stage, bargaining, the fourth stage, depression, fifth stage, acceptance. And it's important to note that this is not a step-by-step process. This is not linear. You start in denial, and then you get angry, and then you bargain, and then you're depressed, and then finally you accept. It doesn't work that way. It's messy. People jump back and forth very quickly sometimes, or sometimes get stuck in a stage for years. And sometimes it feels like they're all happening at the same time. And very often, we get to a state of acceptance and we think, okay, good, I'm over it, I'm done. And then, some new experience comes into your life that triggers you back to something before. And I want you to hold compassion for yourself and anyone that you may be in a relationship with when they seem to be acting, or you seem to be acting irrationally, or your emotional response is not proportional to whatever the experience was. You're grieving, and some old stuff has been reactivated. And I'm angry because my mother died when I was young. I'm not really angry because my daughter left her socks in the living room. I might be a little irritated about that, but not blow up angry. So that's why I'm always interested in flowing, right, with these emotions, so that when I notice that I'm angry and I'm feeling like this injustice in the world that has been laid upon me, it's not fair. I grew up without a mom. All these other people grew up with a mom, blah, blah, blah. It's not fair. I need to have compassion for myself. And I hope that you afford yourself that as well, because that, we want to approach our work with compassion all the time. Shock and denial shows up as a person being checked out. Now, of course, if you just heard that someone close to you has died, you're going to shut down for a while. That's your brain protecting you from the flood of emotion. And that's fine. The issue is sometimes people get stuck in this forever. They are just checked out and need soothing. And often people will move into patterns of unhealthy soothing, like social media, like drugs and alcohol, and other things that are, if not outright self-destructive, at least not really productive and not likely to help them soothe their way out of that frozen state. So if you are stuck in there, or someone you love is stuck in there, soothing, healthy soothing is really the best thing for them. Just like being together quietly, or being left alone for a little bit, and being patient. When patients come in to my office and they've recently been injured, and in addition to whatever pain of the injury there is, they're also in shock and worried about what this is going to mean for their future. Very gentle touch is always helpful. You're not going to make any physical corrections on a person who's in shock. Their nervous system is not going to be able to integrate that. And so they come in and they lay on the table like this, and their whole back feels like armor. And I'm not going to try to dig my way through their plate armor of their back muscles. No, I'm going to be really gentle, warm hands, slow movements, encourage a little bit of breathing, and try and find somewhere on their back, somewhere in their hips or shoulders, where there's a little bit of softness, a little bit of rapport. And I think this strategy works well in body work, but it also works well for ourselves. So as you're laying here and you're listening to my voice and you're tuning into your own body, where are you frozen? in your body and just ask yourself, can I be patient? Can I be warm? Can I be soothing and gentle? And can I find any soft spots in this armor? Just to begin to move in with some gentle, soothing warmth that's sort of going to spread into that cold, frozen up area and start to soothe it, because you can move through that. You can move through being checked out and stuck in fight or flight. It's possible. Just take a couple of deep breaths at this point, because we're going to transition now to talking about anger. And anger is also there to protect you from hurt or the threat of hurt. And anger is a normal human emotion. It is part of the grieving process. It can also be provoked by other things that are not related to loss, hurt, and perceived threat of hurt, injustice, lying, those sorts of things that injure our sense of right and wrong tend to make us angry. So there's anger in the moment for something that just happened, and then there's anger as part of grief, that's anger that we hold on to. And that kind of anger shows up as irritable, frustrated, inflexible, critical. Uh, the person who simply cannot deal with things deviating from their plan for the day. And it's not that they're a bad person or that they mean you harm. It's that they're already dealing with so much in their brain, trying to hold stuff together because it's all very brittle and it's all very fragile. And if they're not holding together, it's all going to fall apart. And now you're asking me to shift gears and move this appointment 30 minutes. I'm sorry, I cannot. I simply cannot. And they might lash out. So, fortunately for me, at work and my personality, I don't deal with angry people very often. Of all the emotions, anger is the one that most needs to be justified. Anger will create its own justification. A person is angry, and then they look for something to be angry about and someone to be angry at. And if you happen to be in the flow of that anger, they're going to think they're angry at you. So this will often trigger us into our own fight or flight, and then we're frozen up and we can't really be rational. But it's looking at this from a distance. But it's really challenging if their anger triggers you. And this is such a great illustration of so many of the difficulties in human relationships, because we're all walking around sometimes inadvertently triggering each other into all of these emotions that have nothing to do with what's going on in the moment. And as a dad who has raised children through their teenage and into their early adulthood years, this was my life, living with teenagers for a number of years, where I was like, I have no idea why I just upset you. I was literally just cooking dinner, right? And you stormed out of the room, and now I'm upset, and now you're upset, and I don't understand why. But we do the best we can. So injecting a little humor in here, and because we're going to move on from anger. That's a hard one for a lot of us. So let's take a couple deep breaths and recenter ourselves, and remember that joy, optimism, humor, compassion, and peace are all our birthright. That's all of that stuff is available to all of us. This next stage we're going to talk about is the bargaining stage. I always had a little bit of trouble with the word bargaining. Again, just kind of injecting humor in here, but I'm Jewish and I was born and raised in New York. And to me, bargaining is about like haggling over price. So it took me a while to wrap my brain around what the psychologists meant when they said this, but it shows up as regret. Here's my take on it. Anyway, it shows up as regret. If only I had done differently, I wouldn't have lost what I lost. If only I had recognized the mole on my mother's shoulder as a melanoma as a 9-year-old boy and told her to go to the doctor, she would not have died of malignant cancer. Of course, I know now that is ridiculous. You can't expect a 9-year-old boy to diagnose. And maybe this is part of what motivated me to be becoming a doctor, is I want to be there for other people the way that I couldn't be there for her. And so it shows up as regret, or it shows up as anxiety, which is almost like regret into the future. I'll only be okay if. And so this turns into controlling behavior, indecision, perfectionism. I have to have things a certain way, not because I'm in anger and I'm trying to hold it together, but because I'm in anxiety and I'm afraid of what might happen if something that I don't want to happen happens. Because something I don't want to happen happened before and it ruined my life, and I don't want that to ever happen again. So this leads to overthinking, over planning, um, replaying conversations on repeat, imagining conversations that may or may not ever happen. This is all our way of bargaining into the future. I'll be okay if, okay, I lost a friend. We never got to say goodbye. I'm still grieving that. I think I would feel better if I could have one less conversation with this person. But I need to reel that back and say, you know what? I'm okay now. I'm okay now. I lost this relationship. It's sad. And I think my life would be lovely if this person was still in my life, but they're not. And my life is lovely just as it is too. Um, what do people need when bargaining? Mindfulness is really helpful. Physical activity, entertainment, creative expression, just something to get us out of that loop of overthinking, overanalyzing, and projecting our fears into the future. In conversation with someone who is in that regret and in that anxiety, um, our instinct is often to say, David, you couldn't have known, you were 9 years old, you couldn't have known that that mole was dangerous. And the other thing we like to say is, well, you did the best you could. Speaking for myself, I don't find those things very helpful when I'm in that stage of grief and bargaining, and I wish things were different. Um, because those are reasonable, logical, and true. I couldn't have done anything. I did do the best I can, and I couldn't have known what was what. But that's not going to soothe me because my bargaining isn't reasonable. My bargaining isn't logical. It's purely emotional. And so rather than try and convince yourself out of it, we're going to dive into it. We're going to lean in and go deep into our bargaining. And put up a video a couple of weeks ago about an exercise in diving deep into our feelings. And you might want to watch that one too. It's also ad free for you. So meet yourself where you are. I'm in regret. Regret is a normal human emotion. As we go through life, we have to make choices. We have to choose A over B or B over C, which means we don't get the things that we didn't choose. And we're imaginative creatures, and we can picture a life where we invested in Google in 1995, right? When we have tons of money, like winning the lottery, we can imagine that. And so when naturally what grows out of that is a feeling of regret. I should have done that. There's nothing wrong with that feeling. We don't need to fight it. We don't need to tell it that it's wrong. We don't need to explain it or justify it. We just need to notice it. And our goal is not to get stuck in there. Oh, look at me. I regret that. I really do. Okay, good to know. What does that feel like? Is there a color? Is there a shape? Is there a texture? If you're a synesthetic person, the way that I am, I think a lot of people are. I think a really good way to indulge in bargaining that's not going to get you stuck is this. What would my life be like today if I had invested in Google in 1995? It's almost like what we used to do with our children. Um, they want to go to Disneyland, but we're going to school, right? Well, we can't go to Disneyland. We're going to school today. But if you were at Disneyland, what would you like to do? And let them have it in their imagination. And so we're going to use our imaginations for good. And I'm going to just daydream. You can even set a timer. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to daydream about this fantastic life of not having to go to work and having all this money because smart me invested in Google before it was big. And so think of bargaining as your brain's way to try to give you what you want. It's trying. And that's how we want to look at grief is a positive, natural, productive healing process that you're doing right now. We're all doing it because we've all lost things. And this is how our brains, our minds, our spirits, our souls um, deal with and temper the pain of loss. So let's talk about depression. And there's a lot of depression in the world. I do believe personally that a lot of it is tied to grief and people in a stalled grieving process because there really isn't a lot of support for grief in our society. Have a patient who uh, does charity work overseas, and she told me this story about survivors of some horrible experiences in Central Africa. And the West, that's us, sent grief counselors to help them, which was very well intentioned. And the grief counselors wanted the folks who had experienced these traumas to talk about the trauma. That was their model for how to get through it, was to process it out loud and talk about it. But what these folks wanted to do, what their culture had taught him, was to sing and dance outside with their family, with their friends, with their loved ones, with their community, and rejoice in life and what they had left. I thought that was such a beautiful story and such an incredible lesson in so many ways. And number one, the way that we do things in the West is not necessarily the best. It's certainly not what's best for everyone in the world. Um, and also just really highlighted for me how limited support there is in our culture for grief. People don't want to see other people crying. Um, and we are afraid to talk about death and we're afraid to talk about loss. Um, I think we could do a lot better. So this is my little drop in the bucket for that. Hopefully you listening will carry this with you and share it with someone else. So depression is not the same as sadness. Depression is much more about numbness and helplessness and a sense of real separation from life, separated from ourselves, separated from other people, and everything is sort of seen through a thick, blurry piece of glass, and everything is sort of heard through this muffled foam. We're not really experiencing our sensations. We're not really experiencing our relationships. Lack of energy, lack of empathy, lack of appetite, dysregulated sleep, dysregulated food, and always, of course, distraction with whether it's substances or social media or just some way to get through the day without having to do the thing that you need to do. So when you are stuck there, and we get stuck there because depression asks us, what's the point? And it doesn't give us an answer. We don't have a why. Why should we? Why should I get up? Why should I care? Why should I do any of this? None of it has a point. And so, if you are in that state of mind, I love you and I care and I see you and I have felt that. And I hope that my words here will not seem to disparage or belittle the pain that you're feeling and the depths of your despair. The way out is to find something bigger than you and work toward it. This is so, so effective. Find some way to do something that helps other people. That gives you a why. That gives you a reason. There are people out there who are suffering, who need something that you have to offer, even if it's just money. If you have money, can you give money to a cause? Can you join a charitable organization that helps people who need help, even if it's just an hour, even if it's just 2 hours? It can have such an incredible impact on their lives and also give you a why. There's a reason to get out of bed. And that reason is the bigger reason is that the world needs you. You're the only person who is like you, who has had your experiences, who has your knowledge. You know things no one else knows. You can do things no one else can do. You are important. The world needs you at your best. I mentioned before that I'm Jewish and I'm not an intensely practicing Jew, but there are things about the Jewish religion that I really like. And one of the things about the Jewish religion that I really like is this basic fundamental idea that you are important, that God put you on this earth for a reason and gave you gifts and talents and motivations and desires. And you have free will. You can decide whether to share those gifts and develop those gifts and make the world around you a better place or not. It's totally up to you. But as a Jewish person, I believe it is my obligation to take what I have been given and do the best that I can with it, to become the version of myself that is most generous, that is kindest, that is most honoring of this incredible world that we live on. So I don't mean to, again, belittle or berate or tell you, you know, if you just clean your room, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you're important. And the voice in your head that tells you that there is no point and that you're not important, that is lying. That's lying, because depression wants to justify itself just like anger. So once we move through depression, we hope that that last stage of grief, and remember, it's not over, it's just that last stage, because we're going to be triggered back again. We're never done, is acceptance and gratitude. The acceptance is the deep understanding of the experience that loss is part of life. Loss is part of life. We don't get to live without dying. We don't get to live without parts of us dying or people close to us dying. We don't get to have things without losing things. The Buddhists say, non-attachment is the way. And I believe that's not to say don't be attached to anything. I don't think they're trying to tell you to get rid of all of your possessions and unattached from all relationships and just live in solitude in a cave in the mountains. It's that we have to accept the fact that we are attached, that we do attach, that we actually need attachments, and understand that those attachments are going to be the source of pain, and prepare ourselves for that pain. And this is what we're doing today by being relaxed and taking a compassionate look at our own grief and our own stages, and where are we in these stages right now today? How do we recognize ourselves when we get stuck in one of these stages? Because we will. I am sorry that I no longer have my mother. However, I am grateful for what I had. I'm grateful for this life. I'm grateful that she brought me into this world and nurtured me for as long as she did. I'm grateful for what I have now, which is loving family and nice friends and a good job and a nice house and people to engage with through this community online, including you. So I'm going to wrap it up. I hope that you are feeling good and nice and relaxed. If you have fallen asleep, happy dreaming. And if you're still awake, I'll see you in the next video. This is Dr. Russ signing off, and have a great day.